Welcome to Life Stories, where real experiences meet profound lessons. Today, we share the powerful journey of a woman who fought against all odds to claim her independence and break free from the emotional constraints of her family. From childhood neglect to the ultimate betrayal. This is a story of resilience, self-discovery, and the unshakable strength it takes to stand up for yourself. Join us as we dive into this moving tale of love, loss, and the power of taking control of your own destiny. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to start today's story. It had been 6 long years of endless sacrifice, dedication, and a relentless pursuit of a dream. And finally, standing there in the middle of my new apartment, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. My name is Emily, and at 29, I could finally say, with pride and humility, that I owned a home of my own. The kind of home I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. The kind of home that never seemed possible until now. The journey to this moment was not an easy one. There were times when I thought about giving up, when the weight of life's challenges made me question whether I was on the right path. But, as the saying goes, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. I had a burning desire to break free from the limitations that life seemed to impose on me. I knew this was my chance to build something for myself, to prove to myself that I was capable of achieving greatness, no matter where I came from. 2 years ago, everything changed. I remember the day I got promoted as though it happened just yesterday. I had been working tirelessly for my company, pouring my heart and soul into every task, always striving to do my best. So when my boss called me into his office that day, I thought I was in trouble. Maybe I had missed a deadline or made some mistake I wasn't aware of. But instead of the scolding I expected, he handed me a contract with a salary increase that took me by surprise. It was far more than I had ever dreamed of earning. That moment felt like a turning point, a sign that everything I had worked for was finally paying off. From that day forward, I changed the way I lived. I became disciplined in a way I had never been before. No more fancy clothes. No more expensive dinners out with friends. Every cent of that increased salary went straight into my savings account. It wasn't easy at first, and there were times when I wanted to treat myself to something special. But I stayed focused on my goal. And in those moments of temptation, I reminded myself that this was bigger than a momentary indulgence. It was about creating a future for myself. A future where I could stand on my own 2 feet without needing anyone else's help. But my savings alone weren't what made this possible. A year ago, I lost someone who had been my anchor in this world. Someone whose love and care had kept me grounded during the darkest days of my life, my grandmother. She was my mother's mother. The woman who raised me when my own family, particularly my father, had failed to offer me the support I needed. My grandmother's passing left a void in my heart, a loss that I would never fully overcome. But in her will, she left me a gift that I never could have imagined, $150,000. It wasn't just money, it was her legacy. A final act of love that would change the course of my life forever. When I combined that inheritance with the savings I had accumulated over the years, it was enough for me to stop dreaming and start taking action. I was finally in a position to house hunt, to search for a place where I could build my own life, free from the shadow of my past. I spent weeks researching different neighborhoods, different buildings, trying to find something that felt right. And then, one day, I found it. A 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was the perfect size. Not too big. Not too small. Just right for someone like me. Someone who was ready to start a new chapter. The best part was that there was no mortgage. I could pay for it in full. And that was exactly what I did. The realtor was stunned when I told her I wanted to pay up front. In full. She looked at me like I had lost my mind. But I didn't care. I had worked for this. I had earned this. And I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take it away from me. When the day finally came for me to sign the papers, I couldn't help but take a moment to savor the feeling. I stood in the apartment, looking around at the empty space, imagining what it would look like with my personal touches, a home that I had created for myself. A place where I could finally feel safe, at peace, and truly at home. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures, posting them on social media to share the good news with my friends and family. The likes and congratulatory comments poured in, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly celebrated. For a moment, I allowed myself to bask in the happiness of it all. It was a dream come true. But then, as I was lost in the moment, my phone rang. The caller ID read Dad and my stomach sank. It wasn't a call I had been expecting. My father had never been one to reach out to me, especially not after everything that had happened. His voice on the other end was dry, emotionless. "Emily," he said, his tone colder than I remembered. "I need you to come over for lunch next Saturday." Those words hit me like a punch in the gut. I hadn't spoken to my father in months, not since Grandma's passing. And now, here he was, calling me out of nowhere, as if nothing had ever happened between us. The floodgates of emotion opened, and I felt a mixture of anger, resentment, and confusion. What did he want from me now? I knew I had to go, but as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change again. The days leading up to that Saturday were filled with dread. I spent every moment thinking about what my father could possibly want from me. He hadn't been a consistent presence in my life. After Mom died when I was 9, he remarried quickly. I barely had time to grieve before Sharon, my stepmother, came into the picture, followed by my half-sister, Chloe. It felt like everything shifted overnight. Suddenly, I wasn't the priority anymore. I wasn't even a part of the picture. It wasn't just that Sharon didn't like me, it was more that she treated me like an inconvenience. Like I didn't belong in my own home. And Chloe, well, she was always the golden child. The new clothes, the newest toys, the family trips that revolved around her needs. It was as if I had become invisible in the house that was once mine. I tried to adjust, to make peace with my new reality. But no matter what I did, it never felt enough. Sharon had her rules, and I was always the one being told to be quieter, to keep to myself, to stop enjoying things that brought me happiness. Meanwhile, Chloe got whatever she wanted, without question or concern. I felt like a ghost floating around in a place that no longer felt like home. The only solace I found during those years came from my grandmother. She was the one person who truly cared about me. When things at home became unbearable, I would escape to her house, just 15 minutes away by bike. Grandma's door was always open for me. Her house became my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe without feeling suffocated by the toxic atmosphere at my father's house. Grandma never judged me. She loved me unconditionally. I spent hours playing board games with my cousins, Jack, Emma, and little Tommy. Or we'd just hang out in the backyard, enjoying the simplicity of life. It was the happiest I ever felt as a child. And it was all thanks to her. She understood me in ways no one else ever could. The love and support she gave me became the foundation of my strength. Back at my father's house, things only seemed to get worse. Chloe grew into a cruel, spoiled teenager. She'd hide my things, spill drinks on my homework, and spread rumors about me at school. Every time something went wrong, it was my fault. My father never stood up for me. He was too busy showering Chloe with affection and attention. By the time I got my college acceptance letter, I was overwhelmed with relief. It wasn't just about getting into a good school. It was about finally leaving. The scholarship was great, but it was Grandma who helped me cover the rest. I knew that once I left, I wouldn't have to deal with my father's family anymore. The thought of leaving my father's house, of finally being free, was enough to push me forward. College was a breath of fresh air. It felt like I had been underwater for so long. And finally, I could breathe. I focused on my studies, made new friends, and made sure to call Grandma as often as I could. She was proud of me. And that meant everything. I didn't expect my father to reach out. He rarely did. When he did, the conversations were superficial, barely meaningful. It was clear he was too caught up in his perfect family life to care about me. After graduation, I had to return to my home state. A job offer from Thompson & Mills was too good to pass up, and I assumed I would stay with Dad and Sharon for a while until I found my own place. But when I called to ask if I could stay there, Sharon quickly shut it down. "Oh, we gave your room to Chloe," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "She needs the extra space for her things. You understand, don't you?" I was stunned. My father didn't say a word. Not one word in my defense. Sharon had taken my room, and instead of standing up for me, my father said nothing. It was like he didn't even care. Thankfully, Grandma opened her arms to me once again. I stayed with her while I started my new job, and within a few months, I had saved enough to rent a small apartment of my own. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I was starting to build a life for myself, away from the suffocating grip of my father's family. Then, just a year ago, Grandma passed away suddenly, a stroke in her sleep. I was devastated. She was my rock, my anchor. But once again, she had left me something, a legacy. She left her house to my cousins, the ones who had lived nearby and helped care for her. To me, she left $150,000. It wasn't just the money, it was her way of saying she believed in me, that she saw the woman I was becoming, and she wanted to help me fulfill my dreams. With that money, I was finally able to start looking for the home I had always longed for. No more renting. No more living in someone else's shadow. This was my time. I thought that with all of this, I had finally escaped the toxic grasp of my father and stepmother. But then came that phone call. The one that would turn everything upside down. The day I drove to my father's house, I felt a tight knot forming in my stomach. There was something unsettling about it. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The closer I got to their neighborhood, the more my anxiety built. It had been so long since I had stepped foot into that house, and the memories that it held were far from pleasant. The house that had once been a home to me now felt like a foreign place. A place where I no longer belonged. I arrived early, hoping to avoid any further discomfort. The minute I pulled up to the house, I could feel my pulse quicken. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. But it was no use. I walked up to the door and rang the bell, each second dragging on longer than the last. When my father opened the door, his face gave nothing away. He didn't greet me with warmth or affection, just a stiff nod and a curt "come in." I stepped inside, trying to brace myself for whatever was coming. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with tension. Sharon sat in her usual spot, perched on her armchair, acting as if she were some kind of queen. Chloe, on the other hand, sprawled across the couch, her phone glued to her hand as if she couldn't be bothered to even look up at me. It was as if I were intruding on their world. A world where I didn't belong. "Sit down," my father instructed, gesturing to the lone chair across from them. His tone was flat, emotionless. I sat trying to keep my composure as I looked around the room. This wasn't the home I remembered. There were no family photos. No sense of warmth. It was cold and sterile. Much like the relationship I had with my father. The silence stretched on, each moment more uncomfortable than the last. Finally, my father cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Chloe has graduated high school," he announced, as if I should be impressed or excited about the news. "She's enrolled in the local college." I nodded, not sure how to respond. Should I congratulate her? Was I supposed to offer a gift? I had never been invited to her graduation, so it felt a little strange to suddenly be expected to acknowledge this milestone in her life. "That's nice," I said carefully, though it felt hollow. My words didn't feel genuine. Because I wasn't genuinely invested in her life. Not anymore. Then my father continued. She needs somewhere to live. A place close to campus. My heart began to race. And I couldn't figure out where this conversation was going. I felt like I was being led down a path I didn't want to follow. But I couldn't turn back now. It's an ideal location, he said. His eyes not meeting mine. Your apartment would be perfect for her. I stared at him, trying to process his words. My apartment. The one I had worked so hard for. The one I had fought for. I thought I must have misheard him. I'm not looking for a roommate, I said slowly, my voice unsure but firm. No, my father said, shaking his head. You misunderstand. Emily. We're not asking you to let Chloe live with you. We're asking you to give her your apartment. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I blinked a few times, hoping this was some kind of joke. But their faces were as serious as they had ever been. They were asking me to give up everything I had worked for. My heart pounded in my chest as the words sank in. Give her my apartment, I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. You want me to just give it away? The one I bought with my own money? The one I saved every penny for? Yes, my father said, his voice unwavering. Amy needs it more than you do. I felt my whole world tilt. This wasn't about Chloe or even about the apartment anymore. This was about control. About taking something from me that I had earned. Something I had fought for. My father's voice was cold. His words sharp as knives. Sharon. Sitting there like a cat that had gotten the cream. Added with a sneer. She deserves it more than you do. After all. What have you done to deserve such a nice place? Living all alone in a 2-bedroom apartment while my poor Chloe has to consider student housing? Her words hit me like a slap in the face. And I could feel the years of hurt and resentment rising to the surface. My father, too, had failed to understand me. He had never seen me as someone worthy of happiness. Not the way he saw Chloe. I wanted to scream. To tell them how much they had hurt me. But instead, I stood up. My chair almost tipping over as I shot to my feet. Are you all completely insane? I demanded. My voice louder than I had ever intended. I'm not giving up my apartment. Not now. Not ever. I bought that place with my own money. My father's face darkened. Your own money, he sneered. Your grandmother gave you $150,000. That's hardly your own money. Something inside me snapped. My grandmother. The one person who had truly cared for me. Who had loved me unconditionally, she was now being used against me. I had worked for everything I had. But somehow, it was never enough. I laughed. But there was no humor in it. You mean my mother's mother? I said. My voice shaking with emotion. The one who actually cared about me when you were too busy playing happy family with Sharon and Chloe. That grandmother. The one who has no relation to Chloe whatsoever. It was then that Chloe, who had been silent until now, finally looked up from her phone. Her face contorted into a look of pure victimhood. You're such a terrible sister, she wailed. Her voice dripping with melodrama. You've always been so mean to me. You've never loved me. Dad. This isn't right. I said. My voice hardening. You didn't raise me. You checked out the moment Mom died. And Sharon moved in. Don't you dare talk to me about how you raised me. I grabbed my purse and turned to leave. My body shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. Behind me, I could hear Chloe's theatrical sobs. Sharon's comforting murmurs. And my father's angry voice calling my name. But I didn't stop. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. As I walked out of that house, a wave of liberation washed over me. I had finally stood up for myself. Something I had struggled to do for years. But even as the door closed behind me, I couldn't shake the heaviness in my heart. I had always wanted a family that loved me. One that accepted me for who I was. But the reality was far from the fairy tale I had imagined. My father, Sharon, and Chloe were never going to see me as more than a burden. And that was something I had to accept. The following weeks were a blur of emotions. My father tried to reach out to me, calling and leaving messages, pleading for me to reconsider. But I refused to listen. There was nothing he could say that would change my mind. It wasn't about the apartment anymore, it was about respect and understanding. The love I had once craved from him was gone, and it wasn't something I could regain. Months passed, and I slowly started to heal. I spent more time with my friends, my real family, the people who genuinely cared about me. My grandmother's legacy still lived within me, not just in the money she left behind, but in the love and wisdom she had shared with me. Eventually, I found peace. My father's world crumbled around him, and while I didn't feel joy in that, I couldn't pretend that I was sad for him either. I had my life, my independence, and my worth, all the things I had earned on my own. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you want to hear more life stories and life-changing lessons, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more updates. See you in the next video.